Hi, I'm Vansh and I changed myself from someone who was addicted to pornography for over 9 years, had a phone addiction, had a problem with junk food, and was just in general a loser, to someone who's getting girls, to someone who's gaining muscle, to someone who went from 30% grades to 92% and also improved his looks, his beliefs, his confidence, his everything. And this isn't just a singular case. I've helped multiple people do this, including Ben, who was my client from UK, who I helped quit pornography during his A levels, his final high school exams, and he went on to get 9s and A stars, with him personally coming out and thanking me for the results. Then there's Rehan, who before meeting me had problems with pornography, with mediocrity, with not having confidence and whatnot, and changed himself to a national level junior golfer and has improved his self esteem, improved his performance in practically everything, his grades, his confidence with girls, his general life has improved because he quit pornography and because he followed my path. So you can trust me. Now, how do we go about quitting pornography? The clear thing is recognizing the patterns which are keeping you trapped. A lot of people say that quitting pornography is very much like trying to win a war. The way you're fighting it is fucking stupid. If you try to use willpower, then that's the equivalent of going on no man's land and just dying. If you try to use something else like blockers, then that is the equivalent of you constantly hiding around in your bunker, doing nothing and just waiting for death. And that means that you need to have some strategy, and that begins by first educating yourself about what is actually happening inside of you, inside of your brain. Now, coming back to that, we have problems, right? We could have problems with our job, like perhaps our boss is arguing with us. It could be our girlfriend, or lack of it perhaps. It could be homework, having too much assignments just ringing down on your neck. It could be work, it could be death of someone or anything else, right? The point is that these problems never fucking end. Problems will always be there. You may get rid of some problems permanently, but you will just trade one set of problems for another. Problems will always be there and you cannot get rid of that. The thing is that the problems cause you stress. Stress could mean any negative emotion, which could mean sadness, grief, anxiety, anything which is keeping you trapped, anything which is keeping you sad. And hence, your brain thinks that these emotions itself are the problem, when that is not the case. But this is the way your brain interprets it. So what it does is short-term coping, and that is EBC, or emotion-based coping. This is the true problem. This could mean drugs, alcohol, weed, pornography, YouTube reels, anything. I've had some people who had problems with web novels and comics and whatnot. It could manifest in a multitude of ways, and you need to understand why it's happening, right? The thing is that when you embrace these things, when you embrace sedation, numbness, comfort, etc., is that it doesn't fix the problem and it adds new ones. So if you, let's say, used pornography or anything else, you have gotten a porn or a addiction problem, right? So we also need to fix these problems, and this is something that we're going to get to. And that begins by first understanding that EBC is not worth it. Now, to simplify EBC, it is short-term gratification, and whenever you do short-term gratification, it causes you to end up worse off later. Now, if you look at the graph, this is showing you that you start with, let's say, 100 mental points in a day, right? And you all of a sudden are reminded by something like work, something like your homework or anything else which basically causes you anxiety, it causes you some level of stress. Now your brain, because it thinks that the stress inherently is the problem, it tries to go for short-term coping. So this means that there's a very high dopamine ramp, and it makes you feel good for a little while, and after that it returns you back not to the 100 points that you started at, but at 90 or 80 or something, and hence it results in a net loss, and it is not worth it. And this is how it works in the long term. You will remember something like a problem with work or with pornography or with addiction or anything else, and it will cause you anxiety, and hence you will spike again, right? And you will end up at 90 again, right? This will be your baseline now. 90 will be your baseline compared to 100, which was your previous baseline. So you are overall ending up worse off long term, right? And so you again remember something else like pornography or anything else. But the point is that because your starting point is lower, the high that you go to is also lower, right? Compared to the previous one. So what actually ends up happening is that you further go back and go back and back until you end up quite literally at like 80 or 90 or like 50 or something, and that is your baseline state. That is now your baseline state of being. And of course, that now is intolerable. Your constant being is in stress because you haven't fixed the problems, you've instead added new ones. The job, the pornography, the addiction, the wife, work, death, anything, all of these problems haven't been addressed. Only the emotions have been tried to suppress, to be numbed, to be sedated, and of course there will be consequences of that. So all of these things, all of these problems just end up increasing, and that is what we wish to fix. Now, the thing is that you need to go towards solution-based coping, which means that you need to focus on the inherent thing that is causing you the problem. So that means the job, the girlfriend. So what is the exact problem that you're having with your girlfriend? Is it perhaps that you're not being with her enough? With homework, what problem are you having with it exactly? And we need to define these things. We need to find out a framework that we can actually target these and we can actually improve our lives. And this is why I present to you the RAID method. RAID means refocus. So again, refocus is the most important step. You start to understand that, okay, I need to focus on the thing which is causing the anxiety rather than the anxiety itself. Hence, I need to focus on, let's say if it's homework, I need to find out what is the true problem. So it's not the anxiety itself, but it is the homework. Hence, I need to focus on actually getting that done. So maybe with your homework, you realize that whenever it's time for you to do it, you end up doing something else, like going on reels, going on shorts, going on pornography or anything else. And hence, you need to address that. Now, this begins by first something as simple as keeping the phone out whenever you're studying, so you don't have any simple method of getting dopamine other than doing the work. And another thing is identify. Identify means the specific problem. So for example, this could be math homework, right? You have a specific problem with the math homework and hence you try to see what specific problem are you having with maths then. You see that it's trigonometry. What exercise then? 1A to 13B. Okay, you try it and you fail at 10 of them. And then you see why. Perhaps you didn't know the equation. Perhaps you didn't apply it correctly. Perhaps you applied the wrong equation in the wrong theorem and whatever. And hence you need to understand that. You need to make notes of that. You need to see what you did wrong. And again, try that. Next time you do it, perhaps you fail only at 3 of them. And the next time you do it, you fail at 0 of them, and hence you will eventually get 100% success rate. Pride is achieved and a baseline self-esteem is made. Hence, the same method can be applied to more complex things, which I'm sure that you can figure out. So I showed you the previous graph about emotion-based coping, and this is the one about solution-based coping. In this one, we start again at 100 mental points and we are reminded of whatever is causing us grief. So it could be homework, right? And here, we actually see that, okay, damn, I better get this homework crap dealt with first so I can just enjoy the rest of my day later. So you first see, okay, I had this trough here where I realized about the homework, and then I slowly started to work at it, and then I slowly got to like 80, and then I got to 90, and then I got to 100, and then my baseline position when I left it is at 110. So what happens here is a net benefit. You end up being better off than you started. You have this baseline level of pride, this baseline level of self-esteem, baseline level of trust at yourself, now that you can actually do something, now that you're not running away from your problems. This is just in the short term though. When you continue to do this, when you continue to have these cycles of, okay, damn, I reminded of the anxiety and whatnot, and then you actually continue to work, you will end up way better off than you started. So for example, in this cycle, we end up at 110. And if you are again reminded of something else which causes you anxiety, you will feel less anxiety over it because you have this level of self-esteem, this level of self-confidence at yourself that you can easily deal with it. And so what ends up happening here is that you start at 110 because that is your normal baseline now, your baseline level of confidence, of self-esteem, of mental ability, and you go to like 70 compared to the 60 you went at before. Now you continue to do work at it and your baseline will now be 120 because you've earned further trust from yourself, you've earned further respect from yourself, and if you continue to repeat these cycles, you will end up better off than you started. You will be less affected by anxiety because you have a higher pain tolerance, a higher ability to deal with things, and hence you will be able to do things much better. I've told you about the RAID method and how you can apply it to basic things like homework, like women, etc. But how does it affect pornography and addiction, where there's so many brainwashing, so many self-limiting beliefs out in the market that you don't know what to trust? and so I'll teach you exactly what to do. The thing is that in your brain there is a pros and cons sheets, and because you may think that pornography is bad, you may consciously know that, doesn't mean that your emotional brain, your human brain, which only focuses on rationalizations rather than pure logic, your reptilian brain, which focuses on pleasure and pain only, does not know what pornography is and does not know that it is a bad thing. So what we need to do is look at the arguments that all of these sides of our brain are giving, and we need to deal with them, right? So this is some vague stuff like delta force B, or that it makes you aggressive, which you've heard online, but you don't really feel emotionally invested into that. You know that it has some effect on you, yes, but you don't feel that in the immediate. You don't think about it that much. You don't really understand why it's doing that, and hence, because you cannot understand it, you only feel some minor level of anxiety at it compared to something else like a gun being blown to your head, when the result is practically the same: brain damage. Anyways, the brain, when it has an urge, when it wants to justify something, will make a bunch of beliefs, right? So it will say something like it increases your concentration, it's good for stress relief, it's educational, or that porn is a friend, or that it harms no one, or that I have naturally low willpower or some crap. And all of these beliefs, when you actually end up questioning them, these tend to be false. So when you start questioning these beliefs, you will end up realizing that all of these things are false. And when you do that, you will see that there is no reason to use pornography. And hence you will end up, of course, quitting it, because you, much like you see crack cocaine or anything else, you don't see a benefit in it, and hence you don't use it. Even if, let's say, we take something like concentration. Taken to its logical extreme, if you actually cared that much about concentration, you would take something like meth or whatnot, but you don't. You use it as a way to justify yourself, but it isn't actually true. You don't really care that much about concentration. It's more about focusing on the emotional numbness, the sedation, etc. And hence, when you get rid of that, when you actually confront these beliefs, you will get far better progress. Now, here's the question. There are primarily three parts of our brains. There's the human brain, which has the history of about a few tens of thousands of years. It's pretty new. There's the mammalian brain, which is the emotional part of our brain, and it has been there for about a few 100,000 years. And then there's the reptilian or primal brain, which has been there for millions of years. Now tell me, which one of your brain parts are you? It's a trick question. You're not either of them. You are not the logical part, okay? Now, one thing that you need to understand is that you are instead the person who is holding the controller. You are not the video game character. You are the consciousness. You are the one who is holding the controller, not the person in the video game, not the video game character. I'll give you an example by an exercise that you'll have to do. So close your eyes and just think for the next 10 seconds. There will be absolute silence. What will my next thought be? You probably had a thought. Maybe you didn't even realize it. Maybe you started counting. Maybe you were reminded of something that you need to do, etc. The point is that your thoughts are not you. Thoughts are simply something as basic as your heart beating or your stomach digesting. So does, and much like that, the brain just thinks. Your thoughts are not you. The brain simply does it because it needs to. This is the brain's function, to think, but you are not your brain. You are the consciousness. So when you separate yourself from your emotions, when you separate yourself from these beliefs like, ooh, I have low willpower, when that inherently is just a thought that you just choose to embrace, it will become far, far easier to quit pornography. Hey, before we go any further, and you actually want results rather than just waiting in line in these YouTube videos and just constantly binging them, then I'm making a course on quitting pornography, which is going to be 4 to 5 hours long. It is currently on pre-sale for about $49. If you're interested, join it, because I'll be increasing the price later. That's all. Cheers. Now that you've understood that you are the consciousness, you need to see all of these parts of yourself as more like soldiers, and yourself, your true self, your consciousness as the general, right? And so Imagine that we tell our soldiers to do something, but all of our soldiers are convinced that this thing that we're telling them to do is bad, right? But we know that deep down it's good, that it will help them, that it will make them survive, that it will further the war effort or whatever, right? So what we need to do is convince these soldiers, and we need to make sure that they actually understand what we're doing. So this begins by the logical brain, which is arguably one of the easiest. Now, one thing to understand is that there's plenty of self-evident beliefs you have, but one of the biggest ones I've seen, especially in terms of the logical aspect, is that lust increases with time, and it does not. Okay, you probably haven't thought about it that much, but you have this subconscious belief that if you don't nut, you will just rile up with energy and energy until you won't be able to fucking control it. And that is stupid. I'll say it for 3 reasons, right? I'm not getting into the sexual transmutation, come up your chakra or some crap shit. I'm just getting into very basic biology, okay? First thing is wet dreams. If, let's say, there's too much of a sperm buildup, the body will naturally release it via wet dreams, via nocturnal emissions, and you won't even find out about it. If you end up waking up in this time, by the way, it's more pleasurable than normal ejaculation, than normal masturbation. That's the only thing I'll say. Another thing is recycling. If, for whatever reason, you don't end up doing wet dreams, then the body will simply break down the old sperm and it will recycle it into new resources which can be used into the body and get rid of some waste material via pissing and pooping. It's as simple, as natural as that. And then there's the true nature of testosterone. People think that testosterone makes them hornier when it doesn't. Testosterone in its essence is something which makes you more competitive. More competitiveness for resources can manifest in many ways. It could be that you are hornier, that you want more women, or it could manifest in something as simple as you want more resources, you want more food, you want more attention, more social fame, etc. It can manifest in a bunch of ways. Now imagine something like Buddhist children, right? They don't quite literally feel lust, right? So they don't have a problem with that, but they still have testosterone. And how does that testosterone manifest? They think, okay, I have this friend of mine and I'm somewhat competing with him. Other than the some games we play and whatnot, I am still competing with him. So I will try to be faster than him in cleaning the monastery, in the time that I'm meditating, in how much time it will take me to achieve nirvana or some crap, right? So when you actually focus on that, when you focus and understand that the nature of testosterone is competitiveness, you can use that to get better results in practically everything. Another one which is pretty easy to get rid of by simply catching up our brain to modern research, to modern beliefs, is our beliefs about willpower. And I'm going to blow your fucking mind on this. Willpower does not exist. Willpower is a concept based on 40-year-old research which hasn't been able to be replicated by a bunch of scientists, which many scientists have questioned the validity of it, and many scientists have tried to replicate the results, but they have got nothing. Another thing is that most of the modern research you're seeing, whether it be some from the 2000s or some one recent one in 2023, is that willpower, if you actually end up believing in it, if you believe that willpower is limited, that your ego has this limited amount of mental points or whatever, and it just ends up depleting, much like the graph I showed you before, you will end up performing worse than the people who think that willpower is unlimited. They quite literally did an experiment of having two people do a mentally straining task, same task. What they found out is that the only difference between the participants was that they believed in willpower, some of them, half of them did, and the other group did not believe in willpower, did not believe that it was limited. The people who did not believe that willpower existed, that they had just infinite levels of willpower, of discipline, of grit, they ended up performing better. So the fact that you believe willpower is itself causing you to perform fucking worse than you actually can. Another thing that you'll see in a lot of high performers like David Goggins, Tim Ferriss, or anyone else is that willpower isn't seen as this limited resource which has to be fucking saved around and put in a few places here and there like fucking coins. True willpower is found when you end up asking yourself, can I take this next step when I'm doing this marathon? Can I do one more rep? Can I do one more pound of pushing? Can I perform just one more second? And when you end up doing that is actually when you find true willpower. Now, I have helped you get rid of your human brain beliefs and your reptilian brain beliefs, right? And there's plenty more, and you will have to find out yourself, or you can join my coaching. But another thing is your mammalian brain or the emotional brain, which is arguably the hardest to deal with. Now, emotion-based coping, this is where it all started. This is the key problem. Everything that you do is emotionally motivated. This is one thing that you need to understand. So imagine something as basic as brushing. Why do you brush? You won't say something like it worsens off my nerves or some crap. At the end of the day, you will only find two arguments. Doing it improves myself emotionally, and not doing it worsens myself emotionally. So when you ask someone why they brush and they reply something like, it helps me smell better, that is them trying to avoid social judgment, that is them trying to avoid feeling worse off. And when they reply something else like it helps me be healthy, that means that they're also trying to avoid pain via sickness. And so there's only two reasons why people brush, why people do practically anything, and that is to either get a benefit or to avoid something bad. Hence why it is very important to have a why in quitting pornography and practically doing anything, because if you don't have that, then you will end up performing worse off than you actually can. Then you will just keep questioning yourself, okay, why do I keep doing this thing when I know it's bad to me, when I know I ought to be doing something else? And until you confront those beliefs, you will not be able to be your true self. As said before, emotions aren't you. If you identify yourself with the emotions, if you identify yourself with your thoughts, then you will of course end up acting like it, much like you do with willpower, much like you do with these self-limiting beliefs about lust and whatnot, right? So you need to understand that, and you need to question all of the beliefs you have. And hence, when you end up doing that, when you end up identifying the true problem, when you end up refocusing in the RAID method, you will solve for solutions and long-term gain, and hence you will also end up increasing your ability to take pain. And when you end up doing all of that, quitting pornography, or at least not doing it, ends up becoming way easier. I hope you found this video helpful, and again, there's a coaching if you wish, and that's all. Cheers.